3 years into her career, and if she's silent, it's her decision to do so, and it will be read as such. I don't think she has to, but the choice.
There is a mob operating in plain sight right now, and Raven Johnson is their latest target. Not because she committed a foul, not because she said something inflammatory, not because she did anything wrong on or off the basketball court. Raven Johnson is being brutally attacked online, having her identity stripped from her, being told she is no longer welcome, no longer black enough, no longer invited, because she celebrated a teammate making the WNBA All-Star game. That is the accusation, that is the crime, and the mob carrying out this sentence is not some anonymous fringe. These are real accounts, real people, posting in real time, declaring that Raven Johnson has chosen a side, and that the side she chose disqualifies her from her own community. This is Rim Run, and today we are pulling back every layer of this story, naming what this mob is actually doing, documenting the receipts they left in public, and asking the one question that nobody in mainstream sports media has the spine to ask directly. When did supporting your teammate become a punishable offense, and who exactly is enforcing that punishment?
Coming out. When you talk about the biggest player of women's basketball history.
Let me set the scene for every single person watching this video, because the details matter. The Indiana Fever had 3 players selected as all-star starters: Kelsey Mitchell, Aaliyah Boston, and Caitlin Clark. The organization put together a celebration video. Raven Johnson, a Fever guard, a teammate of all 3 of those women, posted in support of that moment. She celebrated her locker room. She celebrated her colleagues. She did what teammates do. And the response she received from a vocal, ruthless, deeply troubling segment of the internet was not congratulations for being a good teammate. It was an execution. Comments flooded in declaring that her black card was revoked, that she was no longer invited to the cookout, that she had chosen her side, that she was gone. One account, documenting these responses, quoted a comment that read, "And I want you to sit with this," that they would never cheer for Raven Johnson again. Former college fans of hers, people who watched her play at South Carolina, people who cheered her name, turned on her in real time because she had the audacity to be happy for a teammate who made an all-star team. This is not a debate about basketball. This is not a debate about roster construction or fan voting or media coverage. This is something far uglier, and we are going to name it exactly for what it is.
3 years into her career, and if she's silent, it's her decision to do so, and it will be read as such. I don't think she has to, but the choice.
Let me document every single piece of evidence that came out of this story, because I want you to understand the full scope of what Raven Johnson walked into simply by being a decent human being. The Indiana Fever cut a video celebrating their 3 all-star starters. Raven Johnson participated in that celebration. She posted in support of Caitlin Clark, calling her, in her own words, her sister, her cousin, her auntie, her mama, her friend. Those are not the words of someone who has been coerced. Those are not the words of someone performing for a camera. Those are the words of a young woman who genuinely loves her teammate and wanted the world to know it. That is the entirety of the offense. That is the sum total of what Raven Johnson did that triggered this avalanche of hatred directed at her. And the responses that flooded in afterward were not subtle, they were not coded, they were explicit, documented, and in many cases posted publicly with zero shame. One account asked whether aliens had abducted Raven and scrambled her brain. Another said her brain was fried. Another said she was trying to survive a racist environment, as if celebrating Caitlin Clark making an all-star team was evidence of psychological damage. One said she should just stay quiet. One said she was gone. One said she had chosen her side. And perhaps the most devastating of all, a person who had cheered for Raven Johnson since her college days, who watched her play at South Carolina, declared publicly that they would never cheer for her again. Never again, because she was happy for her teammate. I need you to let that land. I need you to actually sit with that for a second. Because we are not talking about a political stance. We are not talking about an endorsement deal or a public statement or a controversial opinion. We are talking about a young woman posting a celebration video for her teammate, and the mob that attacked her for it is not operating in some dark corner of the internet. They are doing it in the open, with their names attached, with zero hesitation. And that tells you something terrifying about how normalized this behavior has become. Now, the conversation around this moment eventually expanded to include a question that has been circling Caitlin Clark's career since the day she entered the league. Should she say something? Should she speak out more forcefully? And I want to address that directly, because it connects to everything we are watching unfold with Raven Johnson. Caitlin Clark has already spoken. She has spoken out against fan harassment. She has spoken out in support of her teammates and her league. She has done the thing that commentators said she should do. And here is the brutal, undeniable truth that every single person pointing at her silence needs to confront. It did not matter. It does not matter. The people who want to hate Caitlin Clark are going to hate Caitlin Clark regardless of what she says, regardless of what she does, regardless of how many times she steps to a microphone and says the right thing. Because the hatred they have for her is not rooted in her actions. It is rooted in something else entirely. And deep down, every honest person watching this video already knows what that something else is. Don't take my word for it. Listen to what one commentator said, on camera, about exactly this dynamic. The idea that Caitlin should speak out. And notice what the logic reveals about the people making that demand.
Coming out. When you talk about the biggest player of women's basketball history,
the choice to be silent is also an action, and it will be judged. That is what was said, on camera. And I want you to hear what that logic actually means when you apply it to what we just watched happen to Raven Johnson. Because Raven Johnson was not silent. Raven Johnson spoke. Raven Johnson celebrated. Raven Johnson did the exact thing that everyone claims they want. She showed up for her teammate publicly, warmly, and without reservation, and she was brutally punished for it. So what is the actual standard being applied here? If silence is judged, and visible support is also judged, then the only conclusion a rational person can reach is that the judgment was never about the behavior. The judgment was about the target, and the mob attacking Raven Johnson is not enforcing a standard. They are enforcing a loyalty test, and that loyalty test has nothing to do with basketball. Let me walk you through what this loyalty test actually looks like in practice, because this is where the story gets genuinely ugly. The mob attacking Raven Johnson is not a random collection of bad actors. It is a coordinated, vocal, publicly visible segment of the fan base that has decided, and this is the key word, decided that Caitlin Clark's success is a threat. Not a basketball threat, not a competitive threat, an ideological threat, and anyone who does not treat it as such is a traitor. That is the framework. That is the operating logic. And it is the most ruthless, the most intellectually dishonest, the most genuinely racist framework operating in women's basketball discourse right now. And I will not soften that word, racist. Because what else do you call a system that judges a black woman's racial identity based on whether she is enthusiastic enough about the failure of a white woman? What else do you call a mob that strips a young woman of her cultural belonging because she refused to perform resentment on demand? Think about what these accounts were actually asking Raven Johnson to do. They were not asking her to take a political stance. They were not asking her to advocate for anything. They were asking her to suppress genuine human warmth for a teammate and replace it with performative hostility. Not because that hostility would benefit anyone, not because it would advance any cause, but because it would signal the right kind of loyalty to the right kind of people. That is not community, that is a cult. And the moment you understand it as a cult, everything else snaps into focus. The people who said Raven is gone from what exactly? Gone from a community that demands she perform hatred as a membership requirement? If that is what membership costs, then Raven Johnson is better off without the card. And every single person who was part of that mob needs to sit with the reality of what they actually did. They looked at a young black woman celebrating joy with her teammates, and they decided that joy was a betrayal. They decided that warmth was a crime. They decided that loyalty to a locker room was insufficient unless it came packaged with resentment toward one specific player. That is not solidarity. That is not community. That is control. And it is the ugliest kind of control, because it wraps itself in the language of protection while doing nothing but harm. Now, the question of what the broader sports world, what commentators, what analysts, what public figures should say about all of this is a real and important one. And it brought in a voice that I want to address directly, because the take that came out of that conversation is one of the most revealing things said in this entire episode. Shady McCoy weighed in on the Caitlin Clark situation, specifically on the question of fan harassment and what the league or the players themselves can do about it. And his take was, on the surface, a fairly standard sports world response. This is professional sports. Fans get passionate. You cannot control what people say. If you do not like it, do not play. And I want to be clear, there is a kernel of truth in that framework when applied to the general reality of being a public figure in professional sports. Athletes at every level deal with toxic fan behavior, That is real, that is documented, that is not new. But here is where the framework collapses when you apply it to what happened to Raven Johnson. Because Raven Johnson is not the one receiving the harassment in this story. Raven Johnson is the one being punished for refusing to participate in harassment. The mob did not go after Raven because she was a prominent star drawing attention. The mob went after Raven because she was a black woman who dared to express genuine affection for a white teammate. And the "if you do not like it, do not play" framework does not touch that. It does not address it. It does not even acknowledge it. Because the harassment Raven is facing is not the byproduct of her fame. It is the direct product of a racial loyalty test being enforced by people who believe they have the authority to decide who belongs. And here is the second receipt. Here is the moment in that Shady McCoy conversation that I need you to hear, because it cuts directly to the heart of why the "just do not talk about it" advice is so catastrophically insufficient when applied to this specific situation. When you talk about the biggest player in women's basketball history, you are going to be talked about. Simple as that. Now, I want to be careful here because I think that quote is being used to justify something it should not justify. The logic being applied is, Caitlin Clark is the biggest name in the game, so of course people are going to have strong reactions. So of course there is going to be noise. So of course this comes with the territory. And again, in a narrow technical sense, that is true of any transcendent sports figure. But the specific noise we are talking about in this video is not general sports discourse. The specific noise we are talking about is a mob revoking a black woman's racial identity because she was kind to a white teammate. And the moment you frame that as simply the territory that comes with being the biggest player in the game, you have already conceded the most important argument. You have already normalized the mob. You have already told Raven Johnson that what happened to her is an acceptable cost of playing professional basketball alongside Caitlin Clark. And that is not acceptable. That is not a standard. That is a surrender. Let me now make a series of direct, unambiguous statements about what this entire episode reveals. Because I think the analysis has been too cautious, too hedged, too willing to find the charitable interpretation of something that does not deserve one. First, the mob that attacked Raven Johnson is not a fringe. I want to push back hard on the instinct to dismiss this as a small group of bad actors who do not represent anything larger. The accounts that posted these comments were not anonymous bots. They were real people with real follower counts. In some cases, people who had followed Raven Johnson since her college career at South Carolina. These are not strangers who stumbled into a moment of rage. These are people who considered themselves fans, who considered themselves part of a community, who decided that community membership required Raven Johnson to perform a specific kind of racial solidarity, and when she refused, they turned on her with the full force of that community's disapproval. That is not a fringe, that is a structure, and structures do not disappear when you ignore them. Second, the demand being placed on Caitlin Clark to speak out more is, at this point, a fundamentally dishonest demand. I am not saying Caitlin Clark is beyond critique. I am not saying she has handled every moment of her career perfectly, but the specific demand being made here, that she speak out against the harassment of Raven Johnson, is dishonest because the people making that demand have already demonstrated that nothing she says will satisfy them. She spoke out before. She addressed fan harassment. She defended her teammates and her league. And the people who are now demanding she do it again are the same people who dismissed her previous statements as insufficient, as performative, as too little too late. There is no version of Caitlin Clark's statement that will cause the mob to stand down, because the mob's grievance is not with her silence. The mob's grievance is with her existence, with her success, with the fact that she walked into the WNBA and became the most talked about player in the history of the league, and that this happened in a way that the mob experienced as a displacement of the players they had already decided deserved that attention. That resentment does not have a speech-based cure. Third, the people who attacked Raven Johnson are the ones exhibiting racist behavior in this story. I want to say that clearly and without qualification. When you judge a black woman's racial authenticity based on her willingness to express hostility toward a white woman, you are engaging in a form of racial policing that is, by any honest definition, racist. It does not matter that the people doing it are also black. Racism is not exclusively a white-on-black phenomenon. Racial policing, the enforcement of behavioral standards based on race, the stripping of identity from people who violate those standards, is a form of racism regardless of who is doing it to whom. And the accounts that told Raven Johnson her black card was revoked, that she was no longer invited to the cookout, that she was gone, those accounts were engaging in racial policing. Full stop. No qualifier. No but I understand where they are coming from. Racial policing is racial policing, and it caused real harm to a real young woman who did nothing wrong. Fourth, Raven Johnson deserves better from every corner of this conversation. She deserves better from the mob that attacked her. She deserves better from the commentators who have framed this as simply the cost of playing alongside Caitlin Clark. She deserves better from the broader sports media ecosystem that covered this story as a curiosity rather than as the serious cultural moment it actually is. Raven Johnson is a professional basketball player who celebrated her teammate. She should not have to navigate a racial loyalty tribunal as a consequence of that. She should not have to wonder whether posting a joyful video with her colleague is going to cost her cultural belonging. She should not have to exist in a space where the price of genuine human warmth is this kind of brutal, public, documented attack on her identity. She deserves better, and the fact that she has not received it from the people who claim to be her community is the most damning indictment in this entire story. Now let me make my predictions, because this is not over. This story is not going to resolve itself quietly. The dynamics that produce this moment are structural, and structural problems do not disappear after one news cycle. Here is what I believe is going to happen. The mob that attacked Raven Johnson is going to look for the next opportunity. They are not going to reflect on what they did. They are not going to apologize. They are not going to reconsider the framework that led them to declare a young black woman racially unacceptable because she was kind to a white teammate. They are going to wait for the next moment, the next celebration, the next interview, the next social media post, and they are going to apply the same loyalty test. And the next target may not be Raven Johnson. It may be the next Fever player who dares to express genuine warmth for a colleague. It may be a player on another team who makes the mistake of complimenting Caitlin Clark after a game. The mob does not have a specific target. The mob has a standard, and the standard is perform resentment or face consequences. Here is what I also believe. Caitlin Clark is going to keep playing basketball at an elite level, and the people who have built their entire emotional framework around her failure are going to keep being confronted with her success. Every all-star selection, every record, every sold-out arena, every television ratings milestone, all of it is going to keep happening, and the people who have decided that her success is a personal affront are going to keep getting angrier, and that anger is going to keep finding outlets. And those outlets are going to keep being people like Raven Johnson, people who are in Caitlin Clark's orbit, people who are visibly happy for her, people who refuse to perform the resentment that the mob demands. This is a cycle, and the only way it ends is if the people who are part of the mob decide to exit the mob. And based on everything we have seen so far, there is no evidence that is happening. Here is what I predict for Raven Johnson specifically. She is going to be fine, not because this did not hurt, not because the attacks were not real or damaging, but because Raven Johnson is a professional basketball player with a career, a locker room, and teammates who clearly love her. She is not defined by the people who tried to strip her identity in a comment section. She is defined by what she does on the court and by the kind of teammate she clearly is, the kind of teammate who celebrates her colleagues, who posts joy without calculation, who refuses to perform hatred on demand. That is who Raven Johnson is, and no mob, no matter how loud, gets to take that from her. And here is what I predict for the broader conversation. It is going to keep being had badly. The mainstream sports media is going to keep treating this as a hot take opportunity rather than a serious cultural analysis. The commentators who have the largest platforms are going to keep finding the both sides framing that lets them avoid naming what is actually happening. And the people who are doing the most important work, the people who are documenting the specific comments, naming the specific accounts, analyzing the specific framework being used to police black women's racial authenticity, those people are going to keep being dismissed as too angry, too direct, too unwilling to find the charitable interpretation. That is the pattern, and this video is not going to break the pattern, but it is going to be one more clear, documented, direct statement of what actually happened and what it actually means. Let me close by saying this directly to every person who participated in attacking Raven Johnson, because I want there to be no ambiguity about what this video is saying. You did not protect anything. You did not advance any cause. You did not enforce any meaningful standard. What you did was look at a young black woman expressing genuine human warmth for a teammate and decide that her warmth was a betrayal of you. You made her joy about your grievance. You made her celebration about your resentment. You made her locker room loyalty about your ideological test. And in doing so, you demonstrated something that you probably do not want to hear. You demonstrated that the framework you are operating inside is not about community. It is not about solidarity. It is not about protecting black women in the WNBA. It is about control. It is about enforcing a specific emotional performance from black women who play alongside Caitlin Clark. And when they refuse to perform it, when they insist on being full human beings who can love their teammates without your permission, you punish them. That is not solidarity. That is the ugliest kind of policing. And the fact that it comes wrapped in the language of community makes it more dangerous, not less. Raven Johnson called Caitlin Clark her sister, her cousin, her auntie, her mama, her friend. Those words came from somewhere real. They came from a locker room, from shared practices and shared flights and shared losses and shared wins. They came from the kind of bond that forms between people who are in the trenches together every single day. And the mob that tried to punish her for those words does not have the authority to unmake that bond. They never did. They never will. Raven Johnson is still a Fever player. She is still in that locker room. She is still celebrating her teammates. And she is doing it without asking anyone's permission. Here is the question I want you to answer in the comments below, and I want you to be honest. Not diplomatic, not careful, but honest. Do you believe that there is any statement Caitlin Clark could make, any action she could take, any public gesture she could offer, that would actually satisfy the people who are demanding she speak out, yes or no? And if your answer is no, then I want you to tell me, what does that reveal about what those demands are actually for? Drop your answer below. Be specific, be direct. This is the conversation that matters. If this video said something that the rest of sports media is too cautious to say, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to Rim Run if you are not already here, because we are not going to stop having the conversations that need to be had. Hit that bell notification so you do not miss the next one, because this story is not over and we will be here when the next chapter drops.